Hello and welcome back, my dear students, once again to your YouTube channel. In today's video, I shall be discussing a very interesting short story for my class 12 IC students. This story is not only interesting but also different from the ones that you've read till date. Yes, this short story is called The Cookie Lady by Philip Dick, and this is from your book Prism, a collection of ISC short stories. Okay, so let's begin without any further delay. Yes, but before I begin, you know what's coming up next. Yes, if you have been following my videos of late and you feel the videos are helping you understand the chapters, write better answers, kindly do not forget to give me a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also, if you find that you're benefiting from the videos, do not forget, rather, do not hesitate to share the video links with your friends. It will keep me motivated. All right. So, without any further delay, let's get started. I am on page 141 about the author section. First published, page 141, last paragraph. First published in fantasy fiction, July 1953. So, the original source of the story is fantasy fiction, name of a book, which was published in July 1953. The Cookie Lady is a story of terror, chilling, and memorable. So it is a supernatural story. It is a story that deals with beyond the natural world with themes. It tells the tale of a chubby teenager, chubby as in healthy, boy called Babar, who visits the kindly old neighborhood lady who bakes him cookies. What Babar does not know is that the cookie lady has an agenda, a secret plan. She is not as kindly as it seems. So we have the theme of appearance versus reality in the story. In a chilling manner, the apparently kindly lady who feeds Babar cookies steals his life force. We get a hint in the story that she has done this before. So, this is not the first time that she's done it. She is a repeated offender. And that Babar is one of the many children that she is treated in this manner. The story is remarkable for the manner in which the atmosphere builds up. You know, through suspense, the people will be absolutely unsuspecting of what is going to happen, how things are going to turn out to be in the due course of time. And that is kind of going to uh, create an enigma of fantasy and the fantastic in the story. The security that the reader is lulled into at the beginning of the story is slowly and inexorably chipped away as it is replaced by a growing unease, discomfort, which changes to terror. The cookie lady. Where are you going, Babar? On Mill shouted from across the street, fixing papers for his route. Babar is our protagonist, and Earn Mill is a friend of Babar. So he asks, where are you going? No place, Babar Searle said. Full name is Babar Searle. You're going to see your lady friend. Earn laughed and laughed. Why do you go visit that old lady for? Let us in on it. Babar went on. So Babar was unwilling to reveal details. He turned the corner and went down Elm Street. Already he could see the house at the end of the street, set back a little on the lot. The front of the house, this is the description of the house, and the major part of the story is going to take place here. So, the setting. The front of the house was overgrown with weeds, old dry weeds. Weeds are unwanted plants. We will see how weeds become a metaphorical symbol, a metaphor for Babar also. But weeds are unwanted plants. Similarly, Babar would soon turn into unwanted entity for this old lady. The front of the house was overgrown with weeds, old dry weeds that rustled and chattered in the wind. So, description of the house. The house itself was a little grey box. the color gray is intensely symbolic. Throughout the story, we will see that this color is repeated in number of times. The color gray is symbolic of the mundane, the monotonous. It is also symbolic of death, decay, and decadence, and at the same time of the evil with which Mrs. Drew, the cookie lady, is associated with. Shabby and unpainted, the porch steps sagging. There was an old weather beaten rocking chair on the porch with a torn piece of cloth hanging over it. So, this entire thing is the description of the house where the old lady lived. Babar went up the walk. As he started up the rickety steps, the steps were weak. He took a deep breath. He could smell it, the wonderful warm smell, and his mouth began to water. So Babar loved food. He loved to eat. He was a glutton. Okay, and the smell of the food could not, suppress his desire. So he was intensely attracted towards this cookies, his heart thudding with anticipation. Babar turned the handle of the bell. The bell grated rustily on the other side of the door. There was silence for a time, then the sounds of someone stirring as in moving. Mrs. Drew opened the door. She was old, very old, a little dried up old lady, so she was extremely old, like the weeds that grew along the front of the house. She smiled down at Babar, holding the door wide for him to come in. You're just in time, she said. She was extremely happy to see Babar. Come on inside, Bernard. You're just in time. They're just now ready. So it is as if the old lady was preparing the cookies for Babar only. Babar went to the kitchen door and looked in. He could see them resting on a big blue plate on top of the stove. Cookies, a plate of warm, fresh cookies, right out of oven. Cookies with nuts and raisins in them. So the cookies become a symbol of temptation, greed, and bait of Mrs. Drew for Babar. Babar was a glutton. He loved eating. He couldn't control his urge or resist his habit of gormandizing food. Naturally, the cookies become a symbol of bait. Mrs. Drew could easily attract Babar by putting the cookies as a bet for the child. So the cookies here symbolizes temptation, also greed and a bet for Babar. How do they look? Mrs. Drew said. She rustled past him into the kitchen, and maybe some cold milk too. You like cold milk with them. She got the milk pitcher from the window box on the black back porch. Then she poured a glass of milk for him and set some of the cookies on a small plate. Let's go into the living room, she said. Baba nodded. Mrs. Drew carried the milk and the cookies in and set them on the arm of the couch. Then she sat down in her own chair, watching Babar plop himself down by the plate and began to help himself. Babar ate greedily. I told you he was a glutton. As usual, intent on the cookies, silent except for the chewing sounds. Mrs. Drew waited patiently until the boy had finished, and his already ample sides bulged that much more. When Babar was done with the plate, he glanced toward the kitchen again at the rest of the cookies on the stove. Wouldn't you like to wait until for the rest? So Mrs. Drew had already given a few cookies to Babar for him to finish. And the moment he finished it, he tries to look for the remaining one in the kitchen. So Mrs. Drew says, wouldn't you like to wait? Mrs. Drew said, all right, Babar agreed. How were they? Fine. That's good. She leaned back in her chair. Well, what did you do in school today? How did it go? So Mrs. Drew is trying to strike up a conversation so that Baba stays a little longer there. Why? Because she has a secret agenda. All right, the little lady watched the boy look restless around the room. Bernard, she said presently, won't you stay and talk to me for a while? So she's repeatedly coaxing. He had some books on his lap, some school books. Why don't you read to me from your books, you know? I don't see too well anymore and it's comfort to me to be read too. Can I have rest of the cookies? So Baba's mind is fixated on the cookies only. Of course, Babar moved towards her to the end of the couch. He opened his books. World Geography, Principles of Arithmetic, Hoyt Speller. So all these books Babar was carrying. Which do you want? She hesitated. The geography. Babar opened the big blue book at random. Peru. So Peru was the chapter, and Babar starts reading. Peru is bounded on the north by Ecuador and Colombia, on the south by Chile, and on the west by Brazil and Bolivia. Peru is divided into three main sections. These are first, and goes on reading. The little old lady, why little? Because of her height. The little old lady watched him read, his fat cheeks wobbling as he read. Holding his finger next to the line, she was silent, watching him. So she was intently looking at Babar, watching him, studying the boy intently as he read, drinking in each frown of concentration, every motion of his arms and hands. So she was keeping a close watch on Babar. She relaxed, letting herself sink back in her chair. He was very close to her, only a little way off. There was only the table and lamp between them. So they were sitting in close proximity to each other. This is very significant, children. Please note this down, that they were sitting in a very close proximity to each other, and only a lamp and a chair were in between them. How nice it was to have him come. He has been coming for over a month now, ever since the day she had been sitting on her porch and seen him go by and thought to call him, pointing to the cookies by her rocker. So it so happens, this is the background. She was sitting on one day at her porch when Babar was passing that way, and she called out to him and offered him cookies. And since that day, Babar had been a regular visitor at the lady's house. Why had she done it? She did not know. She had been alone so long that she had found herself saying strange things and doing strange things. She saw few people only when she went down to the store or the mailman came with her pension check or the garbage men. So, loneliness, alienation, the theme of loneliness and alienation comes out. Mrs. Drew was a lonely woman. She did not have anyone, and she was also alienated from the rest of the people in society. That is why, probably, she had resorted to all of this. The boy's voice droned on. She was comfortable, peaceful, and relaxed. The little old lady closed her eyes and folded her hands in her lap. As she sat dozing and listening, something began to happen. The little old lady was beginning to change. Her grey wrinkles, the color grey, is repeated. Please note, and the lines dimming away. As she sat in the chair, she was growing younger, the thin, fragile body filling out with youth again. The grey hair thickened and darkened, color coming to the wispy strands. Her arms filled too, the mottled flesh turning a rich hue as it had once been many years before. So slowly she was going back to her younger days. Why did it happen? How did it happen? It has no explanation. So we get the hint of supernaturalism here. The story has, the elements of horror in it, and this is one such instance. All right. Mrs. Drew breathed deeply, not opening her eyes. She could feel something happen, but she did not know what just. So, the unknown, the element of the unknown, a very important aspect of horror. Something was going on, she could feel it, and it was good, but what it was, she did not know exactly know. It had happened before almost every time the boy came and sat by her. So every time Babar would come in, she would feel this vitality of youth within her, especially of late since she has moved her chair nearer to the couch. She took a deep breath. How good it felt, the warm fullness, a breath of warmth inside her cold body for the first time in years. In her chair, the little old lady had become a dark haired matron of perhaps 30. A woman with full cheeks and plump arms and legs. Her lips were red again, her neck even a little too fleshy, as it had been once in the long forgotten past. Suddenly the reading stopped. Babar put down his books and stood up. I have to go, he said. So it has been pretty long time. Babar had been going on reading unsuspectingly, and the lady just beside her had, closed her eyes, and she had been feeling very young from within her. All of a sudden, Babar gets up to leave. Can I take the rest of the cookies with me? But before leaving, his mind was fixated on the cookies because he was a glutton. He asks whether he could take the rest of the cookies in the kitchen. She blinked, rousing herself. The boy was in the kitchen filling his pockets with cookies. She nodded, dazed, still under the spell. The boy took the last cookies. He went across the living room to the door. Mrs. Drew stood up. All at once, the warmth left her. She felt tired, tired and very tired. She caught her breath, breathing quickly. She looked down at her hands, wrinkled thin. So she was changing, but suddenly, when the boy has decided to go, she looks at herself and sees that everything has stopped. She's back to her senile self. Oh, she murmured, tears blurred her eyes. So she was disappointed. It was gone, gone again soon as she moved away. She tottered to the mirror above the mantel and looked at herself. Old, faded eyes stared back, eyes deep set in a withered face. Gone, all gone, as soon as the boy had left her. So she was yearning for beauty and youth. A potent reminder that time ravages all. Youth, beauty, these are all impermanent things on earth. We've seen that in case of Vasavadatta too. So the harsh reality of life is reminded of. Interesting to note here is the cookies were a symbol of temptation for Babar, and this yearning for youth, going back to her former young self, is the symbol of temptation for Mrs. Drew. I'll see you later, Baba said. Please, she whispered, please come back again. Will you come back? So she is desperate to get Babar back, yearning to go back to her younger days. I told you it's a temptation for Mrs. Drew. Sure, Baba said listlessly. He pushed the door open. Goodbye, he went down the steps. In a moment, she heard his shoes against the sidewalk. He was gone. Babar, come in here. Maisel stood angrily. Maisel is Babar's mother, and she had been waiting anxiously for her son to come back because Babar was extraordinarily late that day. Maisel stood angrily on the porch. You get in here and sit down at the table. All right, Babar said. Babar came slowly up on the porch, pushing inside the house. What's the matter with you? She caught his arm. Where have you been? Are you sick? So the mother notices the uncanniness in the behavior of Babar. I'm tired, Babar rubbed his forehead. His father came through the living room with the newspapers in his undershirt. What's the matter? He said. Look at him, Maisel said. All worn out. What have you been doing, Babar? He's been visiting that old lady, Ralph Searle said. Ralph Searle is the father. Can't you tell he's always washed out after he's been visiting her? Very important line. Babar becomes extensively tired after returning from that lady's house. You see, uh, on page 145, just the page before, second paragraph, fourth line, we have been told it had happened before, second paragraph, fourth line, it had happened before almost every time the boy came and sat by her. So every time the boy came and sat by Mrs. Drew, she had been feeling young, while Babar had been feeling extremely weak and tired. So we have here Babar's deterioration placed against Mrs. Drew's rejuvenation. Babar's deterioration versus Mrs. Drew's rejuvenation. And I'm consciously using the word versus so that you understand that both are indirectly proportional to each other. Alright. So the father points out that because he's been visiting this old lady, Babar has been feeling extremely weak. She gives what do you go there for, Bab? What goes on? She gives him cookies, May said. You know how he is about things to eat. He's a glutton. He would do anything for a plate of cookies. He gormandizes food. Bab, his father said, listen to me. I don't want you hanging around that crazy old lady anymore, concerned father. Do you hear me? I don't care how many cookies she gives you. You come home too tired. No more of that. You hear me? So, this is the restriction put on Babar. Babar looked down at the floor, leaning against the door. His heart beat heavily, labored. I told her I would come back. So Babar said, okay, you're asking me not to go back, but I promised her that I would be back. And I think she will feel hurt if I do not keep my words. You can go once more, May said, going into the dining room, but only once more. Tell her you won't be able to come back again, though. You make sure you tell her nice. Be nice to her and, do not be too harsh. Now go upstairs and get washed up. After dinner, better have him lie down, Ralph said, looking up the stairs, watching Babar climb slowly. So he was so tired that he could not even climb the steps. His hand on the banister. He shook his head. I don't like it, he murmured. I don't want him going there anymore. There's something strange about that old lady. So, till now, the father and the mother were unsuspecting of Mrs. Drew. But now they realize that something is definitely wrong. Otherwise, Babar would not feel so washed out. Well, it will be the last time, he said. Wednesday was warm and sunny. Baba strode along, his hands in his pockets. He stopped in front of Megvan's drugstore for a minute, looking speculatively at comic books. At the soda fountain, a woman was drinking a big chocolate soda. The sight of it made Baba's mouth water. A child he was, no, at the end of the day. That settled it. He turned and continued on his way, ever increasing his pace a little, so he's going towards Mrs. Drew's house again. A few minutes later, he came up on the grey sagging porch, again the color grey, and rang the bell. Below him, the weeds blew and rustled with the winds. It was almost 4 o'clock. He could not stay too long, but then it was the last time, anyhow. The door opened. Mrs. Drew's wrinkled face broke into smiles. She was all smiles, seeing Babar back. Come in, Bernard. It's good to see you standing here. It makes me feel so young again to have you visit. He went inside, looking around. I'll start the cookies. I didn't know if you were coming, so she hadn't baked the cookies yet because she wasn't sure whether Babar would be coming or not. But now that Babar is here, she starts baking. She padded into the kitchen. I'll get them started right away. You sit down on the couch. Babar went over and sat down. He noticed that the table and the lamp were gone. The chair was right next to the couch. See, I told you on previous occasion, even though Mrs. Drew was sitting in close proximity to Babar, they had in between them the lamp and the table. Now, even the lamp and the table have been removed, and the chair has been brought very close towards the just beside the porch, so that there is hardly any distance between the two. Very significant point to note. He was looking at the chair in perplexity when Mrs. Drew came rustling back into the room. They are in the oven. I had the batter all ready now. She sat down in a chair with a sigh. Well, how did it go today? How was school? Fine, the usual answer. She nodded. How plump he was. The little boy, Babar, was very obese. Okay, he was on the healthier side. Sitting just a little distance from her, his cheeks red and full, symbol of youth. She could touch him, he was so close. Her aged heart thumped. Ah, to be young again. Youth was so much, it was everything. Being young was the temptation for Mrs. Drew. What did the world mean to the old? Her old age seemed to be a matter of extreme futility to her. She was thoroughly disappointed with old age. Do you want to read me, Bernard? She asked presently. I didn't bring any books. Oh, she nodded. Well, I have some books, she said quickly. I'll get them. She got up, crossing the bookcase as she opened the doors. Baba said, Mrs. Drew, my father says I can't come here anymore. He says this is the last time. I thought I would tell you. She stopped, standing rigid. Everything seemed to leap around her, the room twisting furiously. So, this comes as a shocking revelation to Mrs. Drew. She took a harsh, frightened breath. Bernard, you're not coming back. No, my father says not to. So she realizes that her plans have been read through. There was silence. The old lady took a book at random and came slowly back to her chair. After a while, she passed the book to him, her hands trembling, shaking, because she realizes her plans have been read through probably by Bernard's father. The boy took it without expression because he knew this was the ritual. Looking at its cover, please read, Bernard, please. All right, he opened the book. Where will I start? Anyway, Bernard. He began to read. It was something by Trollope. They only half heard the words, so she was not paying real attention to what the boy was reading. She was half hearing things because her mind is preoccupied with the idea that Babar is not coming back and probably his parents have been suspecting. She put her hand to her forehead, the dry skin brittle and thin like old paper. She trembled with anguish the last time. Baba read on slowly, monotonously. Against the window a fly buzzed. Outside the sun began to set, the air turning cool. A few clouds came up, and the wind in the trees rushed furiously. So, you see, the absolute setting of a horror story. A fly buzzing, the sun has begun to set, the air turning cool, few clouds coming up. Absolute horror. The old lady sat close by the boy, closer than ever. She is in extreme proximity to the boy. Was this really the last time? Terror rose up in her heart and she pushed it back. The last time. She gazed at him, the boy sitting so close to her. After a time, she reached out a thin, dry hand. Very important. She took a deep breath. He would never be back again. There would be no more times, no more. This was the last time he would sit there. She touched his arms. So, on the previous occasion, we've seen there has been, the lamp and the this thing between the old lady and Babar. Now there is no lamp and chair between the old lady and the young boy, and they are in so close proximity to each other that Mrs. Drew touches him for the first time, and this proves to be the real climax of the story. So this direct physical contact enables Mrs. Drew to instill the youth she has been yearning for in her. It will help him to suck out the life force out of Babar, the youthful energy of Babar, and instill within her. Babar looked up. What is it? He's still unsuspecting. He murmured, You don't mind if I touch your arm, do you? No, I guess not. He went on reading. So, this is the direct physical contact. This enables, or this starts the deterioration of Babar. I had told you about the theme of Babar's deterioration versus Mrs. Drew's rejuvenation. Here we find that Babar will soon get washed out, like he has been on previous occasion also, and Mrs. Drew will get rejuvenated. No, I guess not, he went on reading. The old lady could feel the youngness of him flowing between her fingers, so instilling the youth through her arm, pulsating, vibrating youngness so close to her. It had never been that close where she could actually touch it. The feel of life made her dizzy, unsteady, and presently it began to happen as before. The old lady, she closed her eyes, letting it move over her, filling her up, carried into her by the sound of the voice and the feel of the arm. The change, the flow was coming over her, the warm rising feeling. She was blooming again, feeling with life, swelling into richness as she had once long ago. She looked down at her arms, rounded they were, and nails clear. Her hair, black again, heavy and black against her neck. She touched her cheek. The wrinkles had gone, the skin pliant and soft. So she is no longer that wrinkled woman. Her skin has begun to, become young. Joy filled her, a growing, bursting joy, ecstatic moment for Mrs. Drew. She stared around her at the room. She smiled, feeling her firm teeth and gums. So no longer she has, you know, those features of an old woman. She's become exceptionally young. Red lips, strong white teeth. Suddenly she got to her feet, her body secure and confident. She turned a little lithy, quick circle. She had become very agile. Baba stopped reading. Are the cookies ready? Poor fellow, he is still unsuspecting and his mind is still fixated on the cookies, he said. So Baba tends to evolve as a character for whom we, feel pity for. I'll see her voice was alive. Very important. Her voice has become suddenly alive, deep with the quality that had dried out so many years before. Now it was there again, her voice throaty and sensual. She walked quickly to the kitchen and opened the oven. She took out the cookies and put them on top of the stove. Already, she called gaily, happily, come and get them. Babar came past her, her gaze fastened on the sight of the cookies. He was a glutton, of course, he was tempted by the sight of the cookies. She did not even notice the woman by the door. Mrs. Drew hurried from the kitchen. She went into the bedroom, closing the door after her. Then she turned, gazing into her full length mirror on her door. She started appreciating her own self. Young. She was young again, filled out with the sap of vigorous youth. She took a deep breath, her steady bosom swelling, her eyes flashed and she smiled, her skirts flying, young and lovely, and this time it had not gone away. Very significant. This time the transformation has been complete and permanent, because of the direct physical contact. On earlier occasions, it was not direct. Okay, she was just sitting beside the boy, and there was a gap in between of the chair and the lamp. Now she had been able to touch the boy physically, and this touch draws out the entire life force out of Babar, and this lady gets back the youth that she had been yearning for. She opened the door. Babar had filled his mouth and his pockets. He was standing in the center of the living room, his face fat and dull, a dead white. His face has become pale because life force has started going out. What's the matter? Mrs. Drew said. I'm going. All right, Bernard. So the approach has become extremely casual. On the previous occasion, when Babar was deciding to leave, she was desperately asking him to come back. And now she says, all right, despite knowing that this is the last time that Babar has come. So this shows that she no longer needs Babar, that means, because her transformation has been completed. And her purpose has been served. She was requiring Babar to get back her youth. So, because her purpose has been made, this brings out the essential malicious nature of Mrs. Drew, her greed, her selfishness. And thanks for coming to read to me. She laid her hand on her shoulder. Perhaps I'll see you again sometime. My father. I know, she laughed gaily. So, see how malicious she is, the evil laughter that she gives. Opening the door for him. Goodbye, Bernard, goodbye. She watched him go slowly down the steps one at a time. Then she closed the door, skipped back into the bedroom. She unfastened her dress, stepped out of it, the worn grey fabric, again the color grey, suddenly distasteful to her. She used to wear the color grey all these years. Now that she's gone back to her youth, she no longer needs the grey dress. Fabric suddenly distasteful to her. For a brief second, she gazed at her full rounded body, her hands on her hips. She's appreciating her own self. She laughed with excitement, turning a little, her eyes bright. What a wonderful body bursting with life. A swelling breast. Swelling breast. This is significant because a firm swelling breast is also a signifier of youth, also a signifier of a beautiful body that a young woman possesses. A swelling breast, and she could not resist touching herself because she's become so young after years of carrying that senile body, wrinkled, shriveled body. The flesh was firm. She was so many things to do. She gazed about her, breathing quickly. So many things. She stared at the running water in the bathtub and then went to tie her hair up. Probably she's gone to the washroom to clean herself again because she needs to dress up again after many years, as she used to do years back. The wind blew around him as he trudged home. So, Babar is returning home for the final time. But notice the word trudged. He's unable to walk. He is dragging himself. It was late. The sun had set and the sky overhead was dark and cloudy. The wind that blew and nudged against him was cold and it penetrated through his clothing, chilling him. So see the words. Overhead sky was dark, cloudy, sun had set, wind blowing, nudging him, cold wind. These are all the markers and the signifiers of turbulence in nature, of evil in nature, and a very potent symbol that something wrong is going to happen. We've seen that in Macbeth, we've seen that in Julius Caesar, and this is no exception. The boy felt tired, his head ached, and he stopped every few minutes. He was so washed out that he couldn't walk at a stretch. After every few minutes, he needed to take a break. Rubbing his forehead and resting, his heart laboring, desperately beating. He left N Street and went up Pine Street. The wind screeched around him, pushing him from side to side. He did not have any more this thing left in him, energy. He shook his head, trying to clear it. How weary he was, how tired his arms and legs were. He felt the wind hammering at him, pushing and plucking in him. He took a breath and went on. His head down, drooping head is symbolic that he is no longer energetic. At the corner, he stopped, holding on to a lamppost for rest, for support. The sky was quite dark, and this dark sky is symbolic of the darkness that is going to engulf Babar. The street lights were beginning to come on, but unfortunately, there is no light in Babar's life left anymore. As he went on walking as best as he could, "Where is that boy?" Miss Earl said. "The mother is anxious and worried." Going out on the porch for the 10th time, Ralph looked on the light and they stood together. What an awful wind! The father is worried too. The wind whistled and lashed at the porch. The two of them looked up and down the dark street, but they could see nothing but a few newspapers and trash being blown along. "Let's go inside," Ralph said. "He's sure to get a licking when he gets home. When he comes back home, we'll talk to him." They sat down at the dinner table. Presently, May put down her fork. "Listen, do you hear something?" Ralph listened. Outside against the front door, there was a faint sound, a tapping sound as if someone is knocking. He stood up. The wind howled outside, blowing the shades in the room upstairs. "I'll go see what it is," he said. He went to the door and opened it. Something grey, very significant again, the grey color. I told you it is symbolic of death, decadence, and decay. Something grey and dry was blowing up against the porch, carried by the wind. He stared at it but could not make it out. He kept looking at it. What is it that has come to the door? But couldn't make it out. A bundle of weeds and rags blown by the wind, perhaps, he thought, unwanted things. The bundle bounced against his leg. He watched it drift past against him against the wall of the house. Then he closed the door again slowly. What was it? May called. Just the wind, Ralph said. So the ending is very bleak. It does not talk of optimism. The story ends when nature is at its turbulent best. There's no scope for light. Okay, and this is one of the hallmarks of the horror stories. Okay, important thing to note here is when Ralph Searle said this particular line on page 152, the bundle bounced against his leg. What is this bundle? This bundle is nothing but Babar himself, who has metamorphosed, who has transformed, sorry, who has metamorphosed and transformed into a bundle of weeds, which the father is even unable to recognize. Why has he transformed into this bundle of debris, bundle of dust, into this weed? Because from his life, the entire force of youth has been drawn out by Mrs. Drew. He watched it drift past. It was a desperate attempt on Babar to cling on to his father, but unfortunately he couldn't against the turbulent wind. So the bundle bounced against his leg. He watched it drift past against him against the wall of the house. So Babar gets flown away. That is where the story ends. A typical horror story where the ending ends on absolute bleak note. Very interesting and very different stories from the ones we've read till date. Okay, now when we end the story, we see that, as I was talking also to you, telling you also before a little while ago, that when the story ends, we feel real pity for Babar, a young boy who was only a big eater, probably, who loved eating, gets transformed into nothing but weed. And so much so that even his parents are unable to recognize him. And so much so for what? Only for the greed, malice of the sorceress of or rather the evil woman, Mrs. True. All right. So that's the story for you. If you are to talk about the themes of the story, you could say that the story documents the exploitation at the hands of vicious society using a person for its own advantage, number one. Number two, the story documents psychological complexity in the sense it shows what temptation can lead to. For Babar, temptation for the cookies were a temptation for Babar and he gets reduced to nothing but dust. Similarly, for Mrs. Drew, going back to her youth was a temptation, and as a result of which she gets transformed into a young lady from a senile lady. Okay. So, temptation and transformation, if you are to talk about the psychological complexity. And third, of course, is the element of horror that we have in the story. As for the title of the story, The Cookie Lady, of course, you will say that the cookies serve as a metaphor, a symbol for the temptation that we have in life. And we see how the temptation, so, hampers the life of Babar. It transforms Babar's life forever. And the cookie lady, Mrs. Drew, how through her evil, sorceress, malicious nature, she transforms the life of an unsuspecting, innocent boy. All right, I that is the story for you. We'll stop here for today. I hope I could provide a lucid and very simplistic explanation of the story. If you like the video, kindly do not forget to give me a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also, do not forget to share the video link with your friends as it will keep me motivated. See you in the next video. Till then, take very good care of your health and goodbye.